Every year, Manitoba Day is celebrated on May 12th. The day commemorates the passing and royal assent of the Manitoba Act on May 12, 1870, which created the province of Manitoba. In honor of Manitoba Day, we'll be taking a look at the Manitoba Tartan and making a homemade loom so that you can try out weaving for yourself. So what exactly is tartan? Tartan is a pattern that is used in many textiles. You may also know it as plaid. Tartans have Celtic origins and have been used by Scottish families, also known as clans, for centuries. Clan membership was based on kinship and regional identification, and each clan developed a tartan of their own to visually and symbolically identify the clan. Hugh Rankine designed the Manitoba Tartan in 1958. He was born in Winnipeg, but his parents were from Scotland. During World War II, he was injured and spent his recovery in Scotland, where he became interested in tartans and their history. When Hugh returned to Winnipeg after the war, he learned how to weave and started to design a tartan for Manitoba. His wife, Dorothy Rankine, a weaver also of Scottish descent, helped him to weave the tartan. Each color in the Manitoba tartan symbolizes a different aspect of the history of the province of Manitoba. The dark red squares represent the Red River settlement established in 1812 and the fur trade posts from which many of Manitoba's urban settlements developed. The green squares represent the rich natural resources of the province, such as farmlands, forests, minerals, fisheries, and water power. The three blue lines symbolize the Hamilton family heritage of Thomas Douglas, 5th Earl of Selkirk and founder of the Red River settlement. Rankine also references the Hamilton and Douglas tartans because Lord Selkirk was descended from both families. The intersections of the lines represent the joining of the Red and Assiniboine rivers. The dark green lines represent the men and women of diverse cultures who have enriched the life of the prairies. And finally, the yellow lines represent the grain crops and farm produce, which comprise a large segment of the province's economy. Now that we have a better understanding of the Manitoba tartan, let's try weaving out ourselves. For this activity, you will need cardboard, ruler, scissors, a pencil or marker, glue, yarn. First off, we're going to measure out a 15 by 25 centimeter square out of the cardboard. This will be the base for the loom. You're also going to measure out two 2 centimeter by 15 centimeter strips of cardboard and cut those out as well. Now we're going to assemble the loom. Glue those 2 strips down to the larger cardboard rectangle we cut out earlier, and you're going to place them about 4 centimeters from the top and bottom edge. Next, we're going to mark out 11 lines 1 centimeter apart on the top and bottom edge of the loom. Make sure you start 2 centimeters from the vertical edge. Cut a notch on each of those marks. And there's your loom. Weavings have 2 types of thread, warp threads which are vertical and weft threads that are horizontal and weave in between the warp threads. We are going to start off by putting the warp threads onto our loom. Start by putting your thread into the first notch. Flip over the loom and secure the tail with a piece of tape. You're going to want to leave about a 10 centimeter tail. So take the yarn and put it into the notch directly opposite of the first notch. Flip over the loom. Put that yarn into the notch that is directly beside. Bring the yarn over into the notch directly opposite. Flip it over and then bring the yarn into the notch beside it. And now you're going to repeat that process until all of the notches are filled. You're probably going to need around 170 centimeters of yarn to warp your loom. Cut off any excess yarn and secure the tail with a piece of tape. Now we are ready to start weaving. So we have our warp threads, now we need to start weaving the weft thread. The weft threads weave between the warp threads, going over one warp thread and then under another warp thread and then over and under. So that pattern repeats until you reach the end of the loom, and then you are going to repeat that process again for the next row, but in the opposite order. So if you start off going over under, you're going to start in the second row under over under over. A good trick is going under every second warp thread. Push down your row of weft threads every time you finish a row. When you're done with a color and you want to change colors, finish weaving whatever row you're on, cut your yarn, and leave a tail of about 10 centimeters. Get your new yarn color ready, and you are going to weave the opposite way of what the last row was. The white yarn finishes going under that last warp thread. You're going to start on that same side, but instead of going under, you're going to go over that warp thread. Keep weaving as usual. You can keep weaving by hand, but it does make it a lot easier if you have a needle. I'm using a plastic needle with a really big eye, which makes it a lot easier to thread yarn through. So to use a needle like this to weave, you're going to thread your needle with the yarn. You're going to weave in the same way, going over, under, but the needle just makes it a bit easier to get through those warp threads. You can change colors as many times as you want. Now we're gonna finish off your weaving. Finish weaving your last row, leave a tail of about 10 centimeters, and we're gonna take the weaving off the loom. So cut the warp threads right close by to the notches on each side, and then you're gonna tie off 2 warp threads at a time with just a simple knot. I did a double knot here just to make sure they were secure. And tying off the warp threads on the other side too. So this is optional. You can cut off the excess warp threads if you want. You can also leave them if you'd like to have more of a fringe look. And now we're gonna hide those ends of the weft threads that were left hanging loose. For this part, it is really helpful to have a needle. So we're gonna thread the needle with the loose threads, weave it through the warp threads to the center, and then pull it all the way through and cut off the excess. So it's still going to be the same process. You're going to go over and then under the warp threads. I like to do at least 4 just to make sure it's secure. So you're going to repeat this process for all of the loose ends. And your weaving is done. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed learning about the Manitoba Tartan and making your own homemade loom. Happy Manitoba Day!